Thank you. So for those of you who are in New York, I can still say for a few minutes, good morning. So good morning. And just to set the stage for the awesome speaker that you're about to listen to, first, I wanted to ask Andisa a question. Andisa, did you brush your teeth today?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, that's a good question. And now I'm going to ask an intimate question, which is how long did you brush your teeth this morning?
Same as every day, about 7 minutes and 54 seconds.
So I'm going to go with, if you're, if you've listened to your hygienist, you're probably, if we're lucky, brush your teeth at least twice, maybe even 3 times in a day. And for most people, that means maybe about 6 minutes in a day. So if you think about 1,440 minutes in a given day, that means that you're spending interacting with my brand of toothpaste less than 0.5% of your time. And so the challenge we have as marketers is, how do we make ourselves relevant in a world where people interact with us so infrequently and so little? And by the way, I'll bet you that when Andisa was brushing his teeth this morning, he probably wasn't, staring at that tube of toothpaste and thinking, wow, what an amazing brand. This is what it's all about for me. He was probably thinking about, what is he going to say to our NYU students? So what am I going to answer Mark Sondelay in his questions? And so the challenge we have is, how do you create that emotional bond with the consumer so that when the moment of truth happens, when Andisa is walking down the aisle at a supermarket or a pharmacy, and he makes that choice of what he's going to buy, that he's going to buy what he feels good about. And so creating that bond is what this is all about. And so I'd like to, there's almost no introduction you can make of a person like Andisa. So, the 2021 Africa Marketing Leader of the Year, that's awesome. What an honor I'm sure it is for you. But it is a recognition of the amazing career that you've had. So you've worked for over 20 years as a marketing leader, growth leader, lots in the financial services, but also in other areas. But in the few moments that I've had opportunities to interact with Andisa, I will tell you that he's amazingly eloquent, but on top of that, he brings a natural energy and just good vibe, which is really cool. And so again, when we talk about emotional connection, he is the man. And so the real question I have for you, Andisa, is, why are you so passionate about Africa?
Oh, it's 7 o'clock here, so I'll say good evening, Jambo, Sanbonani, and very much a pleasure to be here. Greetings from the southern tip of Africa, South Africa. And Mark, to answer your question, I'm deeply passionate about this continent. We have such diverse cultures. We have got over 1,000 languages. We have some of the fastest growing economies in the world. So I think this is part of the last frontier for growth. But more importantly, the most successful companies in the world, I believe, are companies that help to address problems, social problems and social issues. And which continent has the most social issues? It's Africa. And therefore, I think that Africa has got the greatest opportunities worldwide, both to drive social economic transformation, but also to enable businesses to make a bit of money. So I'm really passionate about this continent. I've been to 34 countries out of the 55 personally, and I think that's fantastic to experience. I think the gift of travel is certainly one that I think is amazing for anybody to experience. I'm deeply humbled and fortunate to have traveled the depths and breadths of this beautiful continent of ours. So thanks for that, Mark. What I thought I'd do today is to kind of share a little bit of thoughts and insights from my experience around where we are today in the world, and really the role of marketing leaders, growth seekers, and brands and organizations in terms of what they need to do. Because I do think that the starting point is that we are living in unprecedented times. And when you look at some of the things that are on the slide, from the crisis of war that is front and center in all of our minds, to climate change, to the impact of COVID, to the ever-evolving digital transformation that is happening around us every single day, it truly is important that we as a generation think about solutions that can really help to shift and drive change. I have a son who's now 13, but when he was 2, we were at my parents' house, and I had a life-changing moment. The landline rang, and I saw my son walking, listening to the sound of the landline, and I saw him standing there looking at the landline. And it occurred to me that my son will never know a time where we used to phone a place and not a person. And so these things are real and tangible in terms of the transformation that is happening around us. But certainly, given the big issues that the world is facing, I think it is important for brands to dig deep and really go back to their roots, to their core DNA, and think about their purpose and really with the role that brands need to play in this very difficult moment that we're facing across the globe. And so there's kind of 6 elements to what I think are the core tenets of really taking brands back to their roots and to authenticity. I think the first one is really around alignment and making sure there's congruence between the purpose of brands, what they stand for, their promise, and how that's delivered and executed to the external marketplace. And I think that is really, really important, because I think in the world we're living in today, the why is almost more important than the what. And so going back to the why and the raison d'etre of organizations is absolutely key. I think the second component is really around shared value acceleration. And it really is about how can we accelerate the creation of business models that help to address social issues? Because I think that's what we need to really help create the impact across societies around the world. I think the third one is really around technology, and in particular, the 4th industrial revolution, and all of the technologies, AI, machine learning. I think marketers, growth leaders, and brand activists need to really immerse themselves in this new technology and think about how we can leverage and integrate this technology into helping to connect more with consumers, but also to help drive socioeconomic impact in the world. I think the debate and the discussion around local but global is really, really important, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into that. Purposeful brand execution. And I think there's never been a more opportune moment than this for brands to deliver on their promise and their purpose, because I do believe that 5 to 10 years from now, people will look back at this moment and think about the businesses and brands that did something to really help countries and the world indeed to really get out of this difficult place that we're in. And last but not least, I'll talk about a concept. I think most people know about mindset, but I'm also a big fan of a gentleman called Tim Wiggum and his work around mood set, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So those are really the 6 pillars of how I think brands could go back to their roots, but also be a lot more authentic in terms of how they drive that. So I'll talk to 2 at a time, and maybe we can pause for a bit of a reflection around those. So the first one is really around this purpose alignment. And I think it is important because the way brands are built fundamentally is on trust. And how that trust is built is not by virtue of how long an organization has been around, but it really is on the basis of people being able to see the congruence between what a brand stands for, its purpose and its vision and its values, but also how it's executed. And therefore, there does need to be alignment between, they say that, integrity is when what you think, what you say, and what you do is aligned. And many people don't always think about the think part. And certainly brands need to adopt the same, which is really around what you think, what you feel, what you say, and what you do. And how can you make sure that there's no misalignment between what brands say and what brands do? And I think an important part of that is being very single-minded about who you are, which markets you serve, what you're about, and the clarity of your value proposition. And I think that the world has gotten so fixated around mass personalization and trying to be all things to everybody. And I do think that brands need to go back to that single-mindedness in terms of who they are, who they're for, and really what the core value proposition is. And I certainly think that one of the brands for me that really stands out, I'm sure we've all seen Pedigree, We're for Dogs. The big ones, the fat ones, the skinny ones, they're for dogs. So when you ask who's Pedigree for, it's so single-minded. And I think that we need to really go back to that single-mindedness in terms of brand and what we stand for. And then making sure that across the piece, there is alignment between how brands communicate, what they promise, and how they are able to deliver that. And we need to be very bold about this and stay true to it, because in my career, in one of the organizations that I worked for, we had a very big debate that was prompted by the CEO, who asked a very interesting question. And his question was, is a brand a personification and manifestation of who you are? Or is a brand a personification and manifestation of who you want to be? And that was very interesting, because he was suggesting that we're not sincere if we are positioning our brand around our aspiration versus what we are. And his argument was, surely Volvo wasn't unsafe and then positioned their brand around safety. Surely they were safe first before they started making the claim. And my argument was, well, it's both. It's a combination of both. You've got to be very clear about your intent, very clear about your positioning, but then you've got to build on that over time and consistently demonstrate the proof. And so that's why Volvo made a big announcement that by 2030, you will not die from being in a Volvo. So you'll be in an accident in a Volvo, and they'll produce the first death-proof car by 2030. So the alignment is really, really important. And certainly we need to be very bold, because sometimes I'm even loath to invest marketing budgets if I know that we can't deliver on the customer experience component. So the first piece is really around purpose, brand alignment, and making sure the integrity of what a brand stands for and how a brand delivers is really, really aligned. The second piece is around shared value. And I just want to open this piece with a short clip that I think is important to position.
There's a fundamental opportunity for business today to impact and address these social problems. And this opportunity is the largest business opportunity we see in business. And the question is, how can we get business thinking to adapt this issue of shared value? This is what I call shared value. Addressing a social issue with a business model. That's shared value. Shared value is capitalism, but it's a higher kind of capitalism. It's capitalism as it was ultimately meant to be, meeting important needs, not incrementally competing for trivial differences in product attributes and market share. Shared value is when we can create social value and economic value simultaneously. It's finding those opportunities that will unleash the greatest possibility we have to actually address these social problems, because we can scale.
So that's really the point I wanted to make around shared value. It's not about philanthropy and it's not about CSI. It's actually about addressing social issues through a business model. And that's why I argued, for example, that the continent of Africa has the largest problems and challenges. But this is where we need to really accelerate business models that help to address those social issues. And I think that what we really need to do, and the example that I use in my former organization, Old Mutual, which is an insurance company, we invested a lot of money right up front to support efforts in the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. And we put a $4 billion worth of money into protecting healthcare workers across all the markets where we operate on the African continent. And we did a lot of things from, producing these test kits and helping with protective equipment and gear. But last year, what we also did was I took to the board a proposition that I would give away all of our marketing budget and put all of that money behind vaccinating our customers. And my argument was there's probably no better marketing than to pay for the vaccine for your customers. In some of our countries, vaccines aren't for free. If you want one, you've got to pay for it. And so these are some of the things. But the point I'm making about this is that, yes, I think it was very, very powerful, but it was about shared value. Because what this was inadvertently doing is reducing the risk in our core business, because the less people die, the less claims we have to pay as an insurance company. So we're addressing social issues, but on the other end, we're also helping to protect the organization and make sure that we're mitigating risks in terms of the significant claims that we've had over the past 2 years. So the point about shared value is really about how do we really make sure that we drive social economic transformation, but also help to drive revenue for the business. So maybe let me pause there after the first two, Mark, for any reflection.
Yeah, so Andisa, you know, when I was first entering the world of marketing, and so as a 22-year-old, I would go to my office, and of course I had plenty of opinions and ideas about the world around me. But when I would walk into the front door of my office, I was asked to check those ideas at the door. Nobody cared. Do your job, period. And today, of course, the world, thankfully, is very different. And so the people that we're talking to today are all people who not only have opinions, but they're actually encouraged to bring their opinions to the forefront and to participate to a greater good. And so the interesting thing about all those overlapping crises that you talked about and that we've all lived through sort of scream out now for organizations and brands to be more authentic, to be more trustworthy, more importantly, to be transparent. And so, in fact, you know, being transparent in and of itself is sort of taking a stand, right? But so what do you believe? I mean, should brands or should organizations today take a stand? And is there a backside to that? Is there, what's the flip side? What's the risk?
Great question. Thanks for that, Mark. Look, I think the starting point for me is the opposite, which is I think silence today almost equals complicity. Brands that don't say anything or don't take a position, I think are complicit in the issues and challenges that we are facing. I generally think that leadership brands take leadership positions. And we have seen that those brands that take a stand are rewarded in many instances by their customers. Because I think customers and consumers more generally today are looking for leadership where there hasn't been. In a lot of government, people are looking for, and if you looked at the latest trust barometer, people trust governments less and they're trusting organizations more. And that means brands are almost the last hope for a lot of consumers. So I definitely think that it's important that brands take positions on social issues, but I think those issues have got to be aligned to the organization's core purpose, to their products that they sell, and really to their ecosystem. And so you've got to almost see the alignment, like I showed you Old Mutual being an insurance company, vaccinating customers, but it's also helping to protect the organization. So there's clear alignment around that. But it took the organization in the first instance having to agree that we are pro-vaccination. And as you know, that's been a massive issue and a massive challenge to get consensus around the pro-vaccination or anti-vaccination position. But I think it is important. And I do think that organizations are rewarded the world over when they do take those positions. So thanks for that. Maybe let me press on to the next two. I think the one is around, you know, fourth industrial revolution and technology. And I do think that us as marketing leaders certainly need to be very familiar with these technologies, because these technologies are going to fundamentally transform the world as we know it today. And I think that for many of us, we kind of rely on agencies and other partners to help us with this. But I think us ourselves, when you think about the jobs of the future, the type of skill sets marketing leaders need to have, it is important that we understand this transformational impact. And I certainly at the moment am busy with a thesis, and my thesis is on how AI can be used for good from an African perspective. And it really threw me out of my comfort zone to try and really understand, AI and its impact. I looked at all the ethical issues around AI. I looked at what are some of the areas where AI could have the biggest impact in terms of challenges that the continent faces, the industries that it was likely to most impact. And then most importantly, how can AI be used as a platform to help support the vision of Africa, which is called Agenda 2063, and more globally, to help support the SDGs. So a small idea in technology, but thinking very broadly about how technology can be used to help drive and accelerate socioeconomic growth aligned to the vision of the African continent, but also which of the sustainable development goals can AI have the biggest impact and the least negative impact, or the least impact from a technology point of view. But the main point here is, how do we really immerse ourselves and really develop our community of practice in deep understanding of technology and the profound impact that it can have? The fourth one is really around local but global, and really making sure that although we are managing multinational brands and multinational organizations, that we do allow for that relevance and those nuances, because the devil is always in the detail in terms of how you win in markets. And I certainly think that being able to tap into that local flavor can really help to accelerate growth in some markets. And I think the beauty of multinational organizations is that they have the ability to adapt, adopt, and kind of roll out quickly in markets, taking lessons from other parts of the globe. But the important thing is about engaging audiences without necessarily trying to change their culture. If you tap into that culture, tap into that nuance, I certainly think that brands can really help drive that localized growth from that perspective. So those are the next two.
And Disa, I happen to work for two very large global organizations. One, L'Oreal, so the #1 cosmetics company in the world, argued that their strategy was called universalization. And so their idea was that it's all about globalizing, but with respect to differences at the local level. And at Colgate, also an incredibly global. But to me, the greatest or the most successful global brands are the ones who are deemed and perceived as in fact being local. Colgate in Mexico is Mexican. Colgate in Argentina is Argentinian. Colgate, of course, in the U.S. is American. And I can pick examples like that around the world. And so, in your mind, how do you best, manage that while keeping authentic to what that brand is in fact about?
Yeah, this is the age-old debate amongst the marketing fraternity. My answer is, and I've written on this topic in a book or two. I think that the answer for me over time has changed. And where I am today, and have been for the past few years, is in the global versus local debate. The answer is very simply, the core essence of the brand needs to remain consistent, but the answer is we win in the markets where we operate. You don't win from head office. You win in the market where you operate. And therefore, it's important that the local markets are the ones that are leading the charge in terms of the manifestation of that brand in that specific market. And so, for example, in the Old Mutual vaccination campaign across all the markets where we operated, there was one country in particular, Tanzania, who at the time, their president didn't even believe there was COVID. And the government hadn't taken a position on COVID, and they told people to eat vegetables and go chill. And therefore, we couldn't launch in that market, although we'd taken a global position that we're pro-vaccination, we're launching this across all our markets. We couldn't just go into that market and now start putting up communications saying, get the vaccine. we would have totally killed our business in that market. So it is important to take the cue from the markets and be led by the nuances, insights, needs in those markets where we operate. And that really is the approach. So the answer is we win in the markets where we compete, not from head office. Cool. And then the last two, I think I've spoken about, purposeful brands and really bringing that to the fore. I think more than ever, people are less interested in the product, the what. People are more interested in the why. Why does the organization and the brand exist? What is the higher purpose? Because people buy into the purpose and the philosophy and the DNA of the brand. And as I've said before, I think that 10 years from now, people will look back at this moment and think about the businesses and brands that did something. And there has been no more better opportune moment than this for brands to finally deliver on all those posters they have on walls at their offices in terms of how they deliver that. The last one is really a really powerful model that I am really passionate about. There's a gentleman called Tim Wiggum who developed this 3M model to unlock mastery. And he talks about mindset, mastery, and mood set. And I think we're familiar with the rest, but mood set is an interesting one because he understood that his mood has a fundamental impact on others. And how it started was actually in his home, where his children used to peep into the room when he's come back from work, and depending on his mood, they would not enter. And he discovered, wow, I really have such a profound impact on my mood at home. And he also started thinking about it in terms of the workplace. And basically, he argues that we have got to do a better job of really intentionally creating positive moods. Because actually, we control our moods. We control how we respond to situations and issues. And more importantly, during COVID, there's never been a more opportune moment for us to demonstrate empathy. People are stressed, they're strained, studying is hard, work is hard, people are working online. It really is very, very difficult. And I argue that there's a very thin line between being grateful you have a job and abuse. But you can help by really creating the right moods. And so, Tim has really done a lot of work in also connecting positive moods to productivity. And I think that's really great in teams and in organizations in terms of how that drives. So I do encourage all of you, he's got some TED Talks, Tim Wiggum, Mood Set, really powerful things that really help us think about how we are and how we can become more intentional with our moods.
It's actually interesting. I mean, to me, a mood, and I'll take it back to emotion, which I started off with, is at the heart of brand purpose, which now we all finally embrace and believe is critically important to any of our brands and businesses, and creating that emotional bond with the consumer is incredibly important, and it's all about how do you make me feel. So it comes back to that mood. Colgate is not about I'm going to give you wonderful teeth without cavities in it anymore. It's giving the world reasons to smile. If you think about that in the context of what you explained is going on, that's very powerful. I guess last two questions for you is one is, how do you apply this at a sort of an organizational level? But a question that is also, we've talked about everything you've said in sort of the African context. And I guess the question I would have is any of what you said not applicable outside of Africa, or is it even more applicable in Africa? And I'm really curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I'll start with the second one, which is the easier one. This is a global perspective. I think that given the issues that we face worldwide, these 6 elements are relevant the world over. If your brand is not consistent and aligned to purpose, if you're not delivering shared value, if you're not leveraging technology, if you're not creating the right moods, if you're not purposeful in your brand, anywhere in the world, I think you've got a significant issue. So it really is about being intentional and really making sure that these 6 are applied most appropriately in the different parts of the globe. I just speak because I'm on the continent, and the issues we have on the continent are quite significant, but certainly they are applied and applicable globally. I think the importance of this mood set idea for me has really been to think about how brands communicate during this difficult time. Are we creating more anxiety amongst consumers? Are we creating more confusion by some of the jargon that we use? Because as you know, organizations have their own internal lingo and we're very good at expressing our internal structures externally. And how are we making it easier for people? How are we creating what I'd like to call the kindness economy, and really creating comfort, creating clarity, creating and helping to create a world where we have more common. And I mean, one of the most profound revelations for me is the connectedness of us as humans during this period. I think COVID has been a gift. I know it's controversial to say that, but COVID has been one of the greatest gifts for all of us to reflect on our humanity, but also the things that are important to us both personally as well as professionally. And I think if we're all rushing back to go back to normal, I think we've missed the whole point of it all. And I certainly have done a lot of introspections personally, and I've thought a lot about some of the privileges that I have that many Africans don't have. But actually, what am I doing to give back on an individual basis? How am I contributing to communities and those less privileged than I am? You know, when it was COVID, my son quickly got onto Wi-Fi and they were back on school online. The majority of Africans and people in other parts of the world don't have access to Wi-Fi and connectivity. So we've got to be able to really think very deeply about the role brands play, the type of communication, the tone of messaging, and how we are really empathetic to where people are in the world today. And I think that speaks to this mood set idea of creating the right mood, creating that environment. I know that Coca-Cola has, or used to have, a happiness index where they kind of assess which countries are the most happiest in the world. And that's part of creating that mood, which I think is really, really important. So just to close, I think that we are sitting in a very interesting place, that although we have significant issues and challenges globally, I think we've also got significant opportunity. But it does take leadership, it does take boldness, and it does fall on every generation to help resolve and make the world slightly better for humankind, but also to help in this very difficult place that we're facing ecologically, from an environmental perspective, and to help the planet kind of move forward. And we've got a massive, massive role, but it does take collective action, and it does take each and every one of us, you know, playing our part, acting together, solving solutions, and really making sure that we contribute to this movement that can really help to drive this change back to our roots and to really help deepen authenticity across the piece. So I just want to leave you with one final story. In the 1930s, 2 Dutch shoemaking companies sent their sales reps to Uganda to look for opportunities. After 1 month, the first sales rep phoned head office in Amsterdam and said, "I'm coming home. Nobody wears shoes." The other sales rep phoned head office and said, "Bring everybody. We're going to open up a factory here. Nobody wears shoes." 2 people, same environment, where one didn't see opportunity, the other one did. And I guess my message is, despite the significant challenges that the world faces, I certainly do see significant opportunities for us as a community of practice, marketing leaders, growth leaders, to really play a significant role in helping to make the world a slightly better place by really going back to the core essence of why our brands were created in the first place, but being very authentic in terms of how we deliver on those promises that we have made. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Andy says, I promised up front, you combine eloquence and insight and positivity. And in my mind, you really embody the whole notion of authenticity. And I really appreciate that. Christina, do we have actually time for any questions, or how are we doing on that?
Yes, we will ask a few questions from the audience now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was incredible. So I think we have time for one question. So you talked about and mentioned the use of technology around marketing, like such as AI, and how marketers could leverage it. But I know there are several ethical issues around it. And do you think this could eventually become a problem, like privacy and how companies can deal with this?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is, how do we make sure that we are providing input as these technologies are being developed? How do we influence? So it's not, at the end of the process starting to think about these issues, because certainly these are designed for humans. And therefore, some of the insights, some of the risks, I think we've got to create forums that help to influence in the development and design process, which I think is really, really important. And then I think we already have got to start thinking about how do we make sure that we have a perspective on each and every one of these technologies in terms of the ethical challenges that they may pose and how we propose to kind of address it from a community perspective. So I think that the collaboration between the chief marketing officer, the chief technology officer has become so much more important in terms of how we really make sure that these solutions deliver value to customers, but also make sure that we protect, all of those rights that consumers most certainly need to have going forward. So it is a bit of a conundrum, because we all want to be able to leverage data, leverage insights to be a lot more targeted in terms of consumer. But I think there's a line that we need to kind of balance in terms of how do we manage that in the best interest of the consumer as well, not just looking at it from an organizational perspective. But I do think we need these forums, and I do think that we need to be educated around these technologies. For far too long, I've seen it even in the digital world, digital marketing world, where we rely so much on agencies, and these agencies pull the wool over our eyes, and we sign money off, we sign briefs off because we ourselves can't articulate how some of these tools and platforms work. And I think that we've got to be very knowledgeable so that we don't A, lose and waste money, but B, risk the impact on consumers in the marketplace and the integrity of our brand going forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Chris?
We want to thank you all for coming. It has been a great and very engaging session. On behalf of the IMA team and NYU SPS, we want to thank you both, Andisa and Mark. And we've loved hearing all the unique insights Andisa has shared with us. And this has been a great learning experience for all of us, for sure. So thank you again. We're so grateful for your time and to hear about your industry experience. Thanks everyone also for coming, and don't forget to catch the next session in Channel 1, starting in 1 minute at 12:35. And if you have any closing remarks, Andisa, we would love to hear about them. Thank you.
I've only got one thing to say. It's been business doing pleasure with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andisa.